All right, good morning. How's everybody? And I was feeling a little bit bad, like I said, how many people were going to show up today, but thanks for hanging in there. And the other day I was competing with lunch, and so didn't have that, but a lot of folks showed up today. My name is Robert Thompson. I use the term around here that I grew up AirWatch, and almost everybody else in here grew up VMware. And that's kind of part of the conversation I'm going to talk about here. So how many of you guys have at least heard of AirWatch? How many of you use AirWatch or administrate AirWatch? So a few more hands go down there, okay? And so the assimilation continues with what we have going on here. So those of you that kind of you lowered your hand a little bit, I figured a history lesson. Those of you that are aware of AirWatch, this may be helpful to you as well to kind of understand the angle that we come at. So we are mostly based in Atlanta. That's where I live. I'm a Georgia boy from South Georgia. I did not go to Georgia Tech, but I kind of went to the competitor of Georgia Tech. But there are a lot of my coworkers in Atlanta that went there, and we have the founder of AirWatch. That's where his that he went as well. But 2003, if you were to do any Googling there for Wandering Wi-Fi, that company I believe is still around under a different name and what have you. But 2003 as well is when you might remember the BlackBerry was out there as well. And then 2007, Apple came out with the iPhone. And that's when we had, 2G, 3G data back then? Around the same time, that's why the BlackBerry wasn't able to do a lot of the things that, the iPhone could. And of course, we were pushing the wireless carriers, you guys, to beef up the networks. But has anybody used Apple Configurator? Or at least know what that is? So Apple Configurator is still out there where you can plug, and they were telling me I had to hide this cord, but I have to demonstrate. You can take Apple Configurator with this Mac and plug it into an iOS device and do a lot of the same things that the MDM carriers can do. But Apple said, okay, yeah, we're going to keep that program around and you can use it, but we're not going to do this stuff over the air. So the MDM solutions like AirWatch and the other folks out there, that's where we step in. Apple says, here's the MDM guide. You guys go out there and do all that stuff. And so that's kind of, one of the offshoots of where AirWatch really took off. And of course, that was around the same time that BlackBerry, everybody was saying, yeah, I know what this BlackBerry does, but this iPhone and Android and all the other, folks out there really took off. And, this is where we are. And of course, the reason why we're here at VMworld 2014, the acquisition. And the assimilation, as I said, continues. But I started with AirWatch just before the acquisition. So that's, like I said, I use the term that I grew up AirWatch. And I see, this place or this, conference from a very different angle than a lot of the other folks here. It's not a bad thing. It's just that I see it from a very different angle. So when we say traditional device management, and I go over to this iPad that I have plugged in, does anybody, have they ever seen this AirWatch agent on the iPad? So that's kind of the AirWatch bread and butter agent that we put on Apple, iOS, Android devices, even Windows devices. We're going to get into those use cases here. We can control the passcode on the device. We can put apps on the device and so forth. That's what we call, again, that traditional device management, and we still do that. But now that we merge in, so those of you that are doing some sort of MDM or know what AirWatch is, how many of you guys are also supporting BYOD, where your employees are bringing your own devices? Some of you probably have your own device, and there's some sort of BYOD in your pocket right now going on there. When and I'll give you a screenshot here later, but maybe you or your coworkers or the folks that you support, they kind of they cock their head to the side and are like, you want to do what to my device? And if we're willing to put just email on there and so forth. So we're going to talk about some use cases here for adaptive management on these devices, and not necessarily, I'll use the term kind of scaring your user or activating devices. But again, going back to traditional AirWatch functionality, we're still doing this. Email, so native mail versus inbox boxer and so forth, and we'll talk about the differences on that. Apps. So are any of you deploying your own IPA APK files? Developing your own? Yeah? So you have outsourced developers building those for you. We have the functionality to deploy that down to your users. But we can go beyond that, as we're going to talk about here in a minute. Content Locker. I don't usually get too many hands raised for that, but we'll talk about some use cases there. But anybody using Content Locker? Yeah, got one here. Yeah, we'll talk about some use cases there. They moved my whiteboard away, but I'll try to explain that. And then browser. We'll go through some use cases for that in a moment as well. So again, I brought up the AirWatch agent on the device. Almost everybody is enforcing some kind of passcode, thumbprint on these iOS devices. Samsung has their own flavor of this biometric. Windows devices, they're doing this facial recognition thing. That's kind of interesting as well. But basically, forcing some sort of, security parameter down to the device and making sure your users basically are using their devices the way you want them to, right? But now this is morphed possibly into, especially when what Microsoft supported now for Windows 10. Thanks. Oh, as he almost falls over here. But now this is morphed into, Windows 10 devices. I live in Atlanta. That was actually an ad at the Atlanta airport for Windows 10. So I'm sure you all know what SCCM is, right? So let's read through just a moment here some of the, what we say, compromised status definition. Secure boot disabled, attestation identity key, data execution prevention, BitLocker disabled, so forth. And I actually, hovered over one of those little bubbles there. I'd have to read up on it. I don't know all these off the top of my head, but you guys at least have a general idea what's going on here, right? And we're going to look at some other features for these Windows 10 devices for cloud domain joining and so forth, where, and when you look at a gold image, for a laptop or desktop to, place on a device that you call, maybe hundreds of or tens or dozens of, you may not necessarily have to put much effort into that anymore. So I delivered somewhat of a flavor of this session to a class once, and there was a guy in the back of the room. He says, "You're trying to replace my job." And I said, "No, I'm not. I didn't say that." And so he kind of, was a little bit reluctant to look at the rest of the session here because he was the SCCM guy at his company. I said, "I didn't say that." But once we got to the end of this session here, and we started looking at these different use cases and things that I have had to deal with as a past administrator, he really is looking at it as like, oh, this is kind of cool, and this can be really nice there. So we can enroll a Windows 10 machine, a Surface tablet, laptop, desktop, and look at these kind of things. Now, in the AirWatch world, when we say compromised status to a Windows machine, you get to define that here. On this iPad, compromised means jailbroken or rooted. On an Android device, same thing, jailbroken or rooted. So that is traditional AirWatch functionality. Kind of expanded here for Windows 10 devices. You can detect this and decide which out of this list is important to you or not, based upon, and they don't have to be attached to your LAN, and we'll talk about those. But going back to any device, that's an iOS device. If we were to enroll this iPad, the user is trusting that AirWatch is now going to control this device, and from that point forward, we can, can remove items from the device and so forth. So just to give you an example there. But this is what I was coming back to on those Windows 10 devices now, and again, I kind of think it's a bit ironic that Microsoft chose a blue screen for that. Have you guys seen that particular blue screen though, on these Windows 10 devices? And I can't remember if this comes on at least the Pro version you see this. I don't know about the Home, I'd have to double check. I think it may be at least the Pro. So this was coming back to the conversation we had earlier, user not on your LAN, maybe not a problem. So my laptop that's back in my hotel room, that's a screenshot of it there. My laptop is cloud domain joined to the VMware domain and enrolled into AirWatch for controls. So this was kind of going back to something we were talking about a little bit earlier here. If you have a user, I'm sure we've all been there, yeah, we just hired this employee today and he's going to work from home 5 states away. Can we get him set up right now? Thank you. So what do you do in that situation? Are you able to look at that employee's home address and say, oh, well, you live near this computer store. I'm comfortable with you buying one of these models of a device. Why don't you go down the road, buy that, expense it, and call me when you get back. I can cloud domain join your device through Azure, Office 365 possibly, which is supported, and get you on the network and right out of the door. Versus this 2 to 3 day thing of, yeah. as I said, disappointing that user. This is what I was talking about earlier. Yep, my laptop that I have for you is sitting on my desk. Got a FedEx to you. The best I can do is, tomorrow, in some sort of scenario there. And again, not on the LAN, not a problem, because we can do all this over the air. You don't have to have this and be limited and restricted, to your LAN at your office. Now, do you start doing this tomorrow? Not necessarily, right? You may not be comfortable with this, but this is supported functionality and something you can do today with, AirWatch Workspace ONE, the whole umbrella of the functionality there. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah. But going back to AirWatch, I asked earlier the iOS, APK, all those apps that you have. This has been traditionally a bread and butter product. If you're not comfortable, even if you're developing your own app, you don't want to put it on the public store. We have the functionality to put these your own apps in your own AirWatch app store. But what about Windows apps? We can silently install MSI files to that Windows 10 machine that you just enrolled, and maybe Cloud Domain Join there. EXE files, INI files, config files. We have this whole product and provisioning feature set within AirWatch. It was originally developed for rugged devices. When I say rugged devices, you guys know what that is, or what those are? Yeah, they have those red LED scanners on them, more or less. They may be Wi-Fi only. Sometimes they have SIM cards, but logistics folks and so forth, that's a whole niche. I actually saw my two coworkers yesterday on the tram. They have some recent big wins with, I think, UPS and so forth, those kind of drivers. That's where that functionality comes out of, where we can take, not necessarily just an MSI file, but EXE files, config files, and so forth, and have batching, and even if it fails on the first round, it can detect, I never heard back from that device, I want to batch it again today and see if it's successful and so forth. Yeah. Yeah, and you can wait for time schedules, have it reboot and so forth. So all that is built into that functionality. Sorry? Yeah. They've traditionally been Windows Mobile, but now they're being replaced a lot by Android now these days. Yeah. Coming back around to the Workspace ONE app, let's talk about some of these other use cases. Let's say that, do they call it primetime TV anymore? Now that Netflix is around, almost everybody streams whenever they have time to watch TV. So that primetime TV thing is not so much. But at some point, that your workday somehow ends around 6 or 7 p.m. So let's say that the employee is having some family time and they have their iPhone. Manager sends the employee an email. Hey, it would be really nice, I know that you're doing whatever with your family, but if you can complete a 20, 30-minute task tonight, that would get us ahead of the job tomorrow morning. And so potentially, some of these features and so forth, that employee, if you're willing to do this and you're comfortable with the security, is maybe the closest computer to them is their personal laptop sitting on their coffee table in front of their TV. So they've seen this email, and a manager says, and the employee's like, okay, I understand the situation. They can pick up their laptop, they can authenticate in a single consistent, option here. And in that scenario, I'm saying, that's great, but I don't know that I really want to open that up to the world. If you look at this scenario here, if I go in as a VMware employee to our Workspace ONE instance, I am challenged with my RSA token. So this is adaptive management from Identity Manager. Because I'm just on, free open Wi-Fi here, it's not being trusted. So that can be challenged with an RSA token. VMware Verify comes with Identity Manager if you don't want to go with an outside solution here. But again, in that scenario of just some random machine hitting Identity Manager, this can be, challenged against the user if it's not a trusted device. All the way down to an activated enrolled device that maybe this browser session just logs them in automatically because that's a trusted device, or there's also network authentication. So keep those use cases in mind as well and being supported if you're interested. So that's Workspace ONE with full MDM, containerization, and we'll talk about what that means in a moment here, versus doing some standalone application. We don't see that too often, but it is supported too. But going back to BYOD, what we were talking about, look at that right-hand side. This agent can erase all the data on your device. It can track your location, grant permissions to AirWatch. And if any of you ever read our lovely reviews on our AirWatch agent, this app forced a factory reset on my phone to encrypt my phone's data to make it safe. And he rated us 1 star. Thanks, end user. We love our end users. This is from their perspective, right? That this is the agent, and you ruin their day, and this is their way of getting back at what they thought ruined their day there. This can be scary to an employee. BYOD, they don't understand really what's going on here. I've been in the situation with the end user. They're asking, what is this thing? What is it doing to my device? I had a user one time. He asked me, "Did you see what I did last weekend?" And I was like, "What?" I don't even go there. It was just a weird conversation. Your users, they just have these weird assumptions of what you've done here. Now, with the Workspace ONE app, this adaptive management, we call it open access or activating a device. Your user doesn't see that stuff, or these scary screens as I call it. Again, I call it kind of activating the device. So we're not collecting location information. So if you have a user base today, or you envision that you got a user base coming up, where they're going to be resistant to activating or getting this on their device, again, that open access path with Workspace ONE can prevent, again, those scary screens over there. But let's say that we get the user in the door. Again, my marketing people don't listen to this, but you trick them. I'll use that word for a second to explain. But let's say several months down the road, you can convert this over to managed access. The user will get a prompt, but the idea is that you're kind of easing them into this. They're kind of comfortable. Yeah, I've seen this Workspace ONE thing before. I'm accepting that, yeah, that there's something different going on now, because maybe it requires, for erasing data or so forth. That adapted, and it does not require re-enrollment. This is all just done right on the screen by the user opting in at that time. So that's newer functionality that is supported today with Workspace ONE. Again, are you going to rush back to your desk tomorrow and change this? Not necessarily. But this is, again, just reminding you this is supported functionality with Workspace ONE if you're interested there. Make sense? Boxer. So if I go back to my iPad to explain the difference between native mail versus using some sort of app, or does anybody use Outlook these days as well? Everybody understand the difference there? If I add account and exchange here, this is native mail, right? So you don't necessarily have to stick with native mail. We bought a company called Boxer out of Texas, and that is slowly replacing the predecessor to that AirWatch Inbox. Anybody use AirWatch Inbox on an Android device possibly? Yep. So you have to rush back to change it out tomorrow, but Boxer is kind of where that is going. The swiping functionality. Does everybody have 0 items in your inbox right now? Oh, you do? Congratulations. No, I don't think anybody ever does that, but some folks, like those swipe actions in Boxer and so forth. They also have the nice thing with the one touch. If you're joining a conference call, it plugs the number in for the meeting number and all that, all in one touch. Those are some things that are built into Boxer for you there. So feel free to explore that if you like. Also some containerization, in a BYOD world with Inbox and Boxer, putting a passcode on just that app, not necessarily the whole device, because you could get some resistance to your employees that maybe you're doing something weird with like some sort of 8-character alphanumeric passcode, and your employee is like, I'm not doing this. But you could just put that on the mail app separate. And then, like I asked him as well, any of you guys using our SEG server? Or heard of it? So let me just kind of briefly explain what our SEG server does. So if you have attachments, PDFs, Excel files, docs, etc., our SEG server can convert these over to AWSEC files. Those are proprietary to Content Locker, which we're leading into in a second. So let's think about a BYOD Android device. And you've got social security numbers, HIPAA information landing in these attachments. before they land on the device, they're in an encrypted AWS-CC file. They're only going to open in that file type on that device. And even if they leave the company, they've saved it off to an SD card, it won't be usable because it's encrypted. So our SEG server can do this if you're interested. It stands for Secure Email Gateway. And that's been around for years and years if that's part of your use case and you're interested there on the infrastructure side. Okay? Content Locker, as I was leading into in a second. Do you have any airlines or anybody in the airline business? Yeah, we did. We had the guy from Southwest in my earlier session. What they're doing now is they're giving the pilots iPads. They're not having to haul around these heavy books with all of the policy and procedures about the plane, and also where they're landing, the airport charts and so forth. All that's being loaded on a tablet for those pilots to use in the cockpit now. But as you can imagine, it's just the same thing. We don't build runways often, but when we do build a runway, you better believe the pilot needs to know. And we want to make sure that the pilot is not downloading the chart for the runway he's about to land on in 10 seconds, right? So there's a lot of auditing and things that are built into these apps to make sure that he has everything he needs, on that device before he actually takes off. And so that type of functionality is built into Content Locker, and we've actually seen some other different apps out there that do similar things, maybe in a little bit better fashion. Beyond that, if you have any content in these file repositories, SharePoint, file shares, and so forth, you can use our Content Gateway server. It acts more or less as a VPN service, and Content Locker running on your device, your user can, that's a screenshot there of Content Locker on an iOS device. Like when you go into your office and you log in, you guys have a G drive, a D drive, like map for yourself. You can extend that through Content Gateway to let your users get to that through Content Locker if you want. That's supported functionality. Browser. So this is VMware Browser, formerly known as AirWatch Browser. That assimilation continues here. What is normally used is you can put this on a device for intranet site browsing. Are you guys doing this today? Yep. And so, but beyond that, just intranet site browsing, kiosk devices. We've seen, I actually had a friend that watched this session this week, and he was asking, he had a time card application at his company, and he was asking about this. He's got some iOS tablets that he wants to supervise, lock into single app mode, and put VMware Browser on there for a time card app. And maybe kind of bolt them on a wall with a constant thing. But we can do that with VMware Browser, iOS, Android, and put them into a kiosk mode for public use if you're interested. That's been supported with AirWatch for years and available to you guys if you're interested. And then data loss prevention with Content Locker, with Browser, when the user is in the session, can they copy paste? Can they screenshot? We can watermark the screen and so forth. So again, these types of documents, do you want them to be able to do other things with those documents? So we have that built into these apps as well if you wish. Browser also can have its own whitelist blacklist beyond what's going on the access point if you're interested too. All right, so that's the sales part. I'll let you read that. I'm not a sales guy. I don't do money. But I'm around for questions. Is this helpful? Did you know we could do this? Some of you say yes, some of you no, but so hopefully it was helpful to most of you. I'm around for questions. Feel free to hang out and whatever you need. These white things are USB power extensions. So feel free to grab those. It'll be helpful as you're on the road. But thank you all for coming out and spending your last day with me. And maybe we'll see you in a class one day. All right? Thanks.